I'm Mr. Beat, and we're in Springfield, Illinois. You knew that. We're here in Springfield, Illinois, looking for Abraham Lincoln. Have you seen Lincoln? I've been looking for him.
Oh, I don't know.
No, not today.
Have you seen Lincoln?
I have not seen Lincoln around here.
Yeah, there's all these signs that say looking for Lincoln around town. Have you seen him?
Not around here.
I can't seem to find him. Where is he? I wonder why we can't find him. Because he's dead. But in so many ways, he lives on. First of all, you've heard of Abraham Lincoln, haven't you? He's kind of a big deal. We've turned him into a symbol. Yep, that's him. We've slapped his name on a car brand, a tunnel, and a memorial the size of a small stadium. And that memorial is even on the back of your $5 bill. And penny, rest in peace. I mean, without Lincoln, there's no Lincoln Park. Even his nicknames are famous. Honest Abe, the Great Emancipator, the first president to grow a beard while in office. He wore a hat so tall it made him look like an architectural landmark. But probably more importantly, Abraham Lincoln is almost single-handedly the dude who saved the Union and ended slavery. If you had Franklin Pierce or James Buchanan or Andrew Johnson as president instead, we would have two different countries right now, probably.
Yeah, exactly.
The idea that somebody in the 1800s changed his mind about a group of people that were considered the bottom rung of society speaks to not only his integrity, but his willingness to adapt to change.
If you ask not just historians, but if you ask the average American to rank the greatest presidents, Lincoln usually sits right at the top, chilling right there with George Washington. We basically treat him like a secular saint. But why? Why the bloody heck? I mean, he's not my favorite president. Also, Lincoln wasn't exactly a saint. And y'all know this, history is messy. If you actually look at his entire life, from his dirt poor upbringing to his controversial rule-bending presidency, you find a man who was way more complicated, way more stressed out, and frankly, a lot more weird than your history textbook lets on. For example, did you know he was a licensed bartender? Or that he took medical pills made of actual mercury that probably gave him insane mood swings? Or that, despite freeing the slaves, he was pretty racist? In this video, let's go through the entire life and legacy of Abraham Lincoln and try to figure out, why is he often seen as the greatest president in American history? Why doesn't his poop seem to stink? And as I said long ago, way back at the beginning of this video, I'm here in Springfield to hang out where Lincoln used to hang out, to even try to literally trace his footsteps. Oh, and I even have a tour guide to help me out. Well, he's a fellow American history teacher and video maker.
Hey, I'm Jared Bruning from the Daily Bell Ringer.
And have you heard of Abraham Lincoln?
Yeah.
I knew it!
Oh, yeah.
Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12th, 1809 in a one-room log cabin in modern-day LaRue County, Kentucky. Yeah, that's it. Well, no, that's not it. That's a reconstruction of it, but it probably would have looked like that. Anyway, Abraham's parents, Thomas and Nancy Hanks Lincoln, were farmers. He had an older sister, Sarah, and a younger brother, Thomas Jr., who died as a baby. If you think your childhood was rough, Lincoln's family literally lived on the edge of survival on the American frontier. There were no Starbucks around. When Abe was just 7 years old, his family packed up and moved to the deep woods of Indiana, in part because Indiana was a free state and Kentucky was a slave state. Thomas Lincoln was a strict and kind of harsh man. He didn't see much value in books or education. He'd rather have his son clear fields or split rails.
You know, like splitting rails like for a fence. You split the wood in half, make a fence out of it. Splitting rails.
Yeah, they probably don't know what that means.
No.
Yeah, there's Abe splitting rails. Abe hated the physical labor, but he loved reading. He'd walk literally miles to borrow a book. Totally hooked on phonics. Later in life, he estimated that all of his formal schooling combined added up to less than 1 year. He was almost entirely self-taught. Tragedy hit him early and often. When he was 9, his beloved mom died of milk sickness, a surprisingly fairly common form of poisoning on the Midwestern frontier, and which happened when people drank milk from cows that ate the toxic white snakeroot plant. Don't eat it! Around that same time, Abraham got kicked in the head by a horse, knocking him unconscious for several hours. A few years later, his older sister Sarah died during childbirth. Another time, he nearly chopped his thumb off with an axe. Some historians say all this trauma triggered a severe, lifelong depression. Back then, they called it, quote, melancholy. Today, we'd recognize it as clinical depression. Lincoln struggled with it his entire adult life, often using humor as a defense mechanism to keep his dark thoughts at bay.
There's stories about Lincoln when he would go into cabinet meetings. Lincoln would come in and they would have a serious topic they had to discuss, and then Lincoln would start basically telling dad jokes, and that it would just be these stupid old backwood yarns and stuff that Lincoln would start telling. And a lot of times his cabinet members would just be like furious, like, we have important things to deal with, and here you are telling some stupid joke.
Abe's dad remarried to a woman named Sarah Bush Johnston, a widow herself with 3 children of her own. Abraham would become close to her. In 1828, when Abe was 19, he took a flatboat trip down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. There, he saw the cruelty of slavery up close, and it really freaking affected him. In March 1830, fearing another milk sickness outbreak, told you it was fairly common, the family moved again, this time to Illinois. By the time Lincoln was 21 years old, he was 6 foot 4 inches tall. At the time, the average height for an American adult man was 5 foot 8. So Lincoln literally towered over everyone else.
There weren't even beds that were long enough for Abraham Lincoln. His feet would constantly be hanging out the end.
Also, by the time he was an adult, he wasn't getting along very well with his dad. As soon as he turned 21, he basically said, all right, I'm out, and he struck out on his own, leaving his father's farm behind for good. Before he was a politician, Lincoln was trying to find any way to make a buck that didn't involve, you know, clearing forests. Let's look at his resume from his 20s. Flatboat pilot. The dude guided cargo down the Mississippi River all the way to New Orleans. You heard from a tour guide. The first time he sailed down the Mississippi River, he didn't have a way back.
Well, yeah, it was pretty much standard. Once you floated all the way down to New Orleans, you just sold off the wood there in New Orleans, and then you had to find your own way back. Some people claim that he actually walked all the way back to Illinois. There's others that say he got on a steamer. Either way, it was a long trip for him to get back.
General store clerk. He co-owned a store that went deeply into debt. His partner died, leaving Abe to pay off what he called the, quote, national debt. It would take him years to pay it back. Bartender. Yes, the store had a liquor license, and Abe served drinks. Postmaster. He ran the local post office and used his spare time to read every newspaper that came through. Heck yeah. Surveyor. He taught himself geometry in 6 weeks. No big deal. Just to get a job mapping land boundaries. Comedian. I'm not joking. Lincoln would basically just show up to taverns and people would show up to watch him tell funny stories. Interestingly, his great public speaking skills got him into politics.
He was just one of those people that basically remembered every joke that he ever heard.
I am horrible at remembering jokes.
Yeah, me too. I can't remember any.
He'd write all his own speeches, and he was pretty good at writing them. And this is where he lived when he was in his 20s. New Salem, Illinois. Well, this is actually a recreation of New Salem, as the original village, it don't exist no more. Imagine being so famous in history that they resurrect a village you lived in for just 6 years. All of this was reconstructed because he lived here for 6 years. But yeah, this is pretty much what it would have looked like when Abraham Lincoln lived here in the 1830s. Anyway, some big moments in Lincoln's life happened when he was in New Salem. It was there in 1832 where he signed up to serve in the Black Hawk War. He didn't see any actual combat, but he was elected captain of his volunteer militia unit, which gave him his first taste of leadership. He later joked that he, quote, suffered a good many bloody struggles with the mosquitoes. It was in New Salem that Lincoln developed a reputation as one tough son of a gun after winning a wrestling match with the leader of a local gang called Clary's Grove Boys. But nah, man, what he really wanted to do was law and politics. In 1834, at age 25, he won a seat in the Illinois State Legislature as a member of the newly formed Whig Party. The Whigs loved infrastructure, big banks, and modernization. And Lincoln was a pretty big fan of the Whig leader, another dude from Kentucky, Henry Clay. While serving in the legislature, Lincoln decided he wanted to become a lawyer. I know, that's kind of backwards. Usually it's the other way around. You become a lawyer first, then you enter politics. But Lincoln wasn't like other boys. And of course, he didn't go to law school. He literally just bought a bunch of law books, memorized them, passed the bar exam in 1836, and moved to the new state capital of Springfield to open a practice. Oh crap. Well, I guess we have to go to Springfield now. Heck yeah. It was here in Springfield where Abraham Lincoln met Mary Todd.
Mary Todd was quite the hot item, and there was a guy named Stephen Douglas, who Stephen Douglas, of course, is going to debate Lincoln later on. Douglas was trying to, I guess you could say, hook up with Mary Todd.
That's right. Every night, Stephen Douglas was on, was it Tinder? Is that the and he was, he swiped right for Mary Todd. Was it swipe left or right?
I've never been on
I've never been on a dating app.
I have no idea.
Swipe right if you like him, right?
Mary Todd, I'd swipe right.
Mary came from a wealthy, aristocratic, slave-holding family in Kentucky. Oh, don't worry. Mary never owned any slaves herself, and I'm pretty sure she was against slavery.
It's kind of a mixed bag on that. Mary Todd, being from Kentucky, she had family that supported the Confederacy, so was she an abolitionist? Was she not?
Mary was brilliant, fiercely ambitious, and a bit high-strung, I would say. She was also 14 inches shorter than Lincoln, but they apparently fell in love. Lincoln and Mary had a stormy courtship. In fact, Lincoln actually got cold feet and broke off their engagement once, but they ultimately would get married on November 4th, 1842. He was 33 at the time. She was 23. They'd eventually have 4 sons together: Robert, Edward, William, and Thomas. Tragically, only one of them would live to adulthood. And that dude, Robert Todd Lincoln, would strangely be present at a bunch of tragic deaths of important people. Lincoln served 4 terms in the Illinois House of Representatives, right in the building behind us.
Well, actually, that's a reconstruction. It's not the original building. Sorry.
Party pooper. Lincoln was not afraid to attack other politicians. He famously, very publicly, criticized Illinois' state auditor and future U.S. Senator James Shields. Shields was so upset by it that he challenged Lincoln to a duel.
The interesting thing is the guy that challenged him, of course, was much shorter than Lincoln. And the deal was Lincoln got to choose what weapons they used. They didn't necessarily have to use pistols. And so Lincoln wisely said, I want to use swords. And of course, the other guy that challenged him, much shorter than him, realized, wait a second, this guy's gonna have a sword with a much longer reach than I have. They all called the duel off because the guy realized, I don't stand a chance against this giant.
Eventually, the two became friends. In January 1844, Lincoln bought the home that you see behind me right now. It was the only home he ever owned. And finally, the house you see is the original one preserved. That's what I'm talking about. You can tour it and everything, and we did, obviously.
Imagine being so famous that when you die, they preserve your whole neighborhood. Or imagine being so famous that your entire state is called the land of your name.
Lincoln would buy it for $1,500, and his family would live there for 17 years, right up until he moved to the White House. I like to think in an alternate timeline, Lincoln got to come back and retire in this home, sitting up there every day in that balcony, sipping his coffee and reading a newspaper. Stop! I hate to interrupt like this, but we simply cannot make videos like this without a little help. Now, sometimes we unfortunately have to give our private information to corporations. We've recently had to give car dealerships our private information, and now they won't stop calling us. But I hate to break it to you, every time you go online, giant corporations are also stealing your personal data. And then data brokers are turning around and selling your personal data to anyone. Stuff like your address, your phone number, and even your political beliefs and income level. But you want to know one way I fight back? Delete Me. Delete Me proactively removes our home address, phone numbers, and family details from the internet. What I like about Delete Me is that it sends you these personalized privacy reports showing what they found, where they found it, and what they deleted. I've been using it for several years now, and it's done a really good job scrubbing my personal information from all kinds of messed up sites out there. So protect your personal information and your family's personal information by using Delete Me. And get 20% off Delete Me consumer plans by going to joindeleteme.com/MrBeat using code MrBeat. If you're sitting on the couch right now, just scan that QR code. You don't even have to get up, okay? Again, it's joindeleteme.com/MrBeat, code MrBeat, get 20% off. Thanks to Delete Me for sponsoring this video. Proceed. Originally, it was a much smaller house. Lincoln expanded it to its current size in 1856 to accommodate his growing family. By this time, it was pretty obvious that Lincoln had higher ambitions. The federal government, baby. But he actually lost the first time he ran for the United States Congress. After failing to earn the Whig nomination for Illinois' 7th district seat in the U.S. House of Representatives in 1844, 2 years later, Lincoln finally made it to the big leagues, getting elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. But he quickly made enemies soon after taking office. Democratic President James K. Polk had just kicked off the Mexican-American War, claiming that Mexico had shed, quote, American blood on American soil. Well, Lincoln thought Polk was totally full of crap. He believed Polk had intentionally provoked Mexico to grab land to expand slavery. And for the record, I think Lincoln was right about this.
Yeah, I think Lincoln was right. We were purposely trying to go to war.
Yeah, we have hindsight 2020, but he had 2020. Sorry. Lincoln introduced what became known as the, quote, Spot Resolutions, nicknamed that because he demanded that President Polk point to the exact spot on the map where American blood was shed to prove the war was justified. Yeah, this did not go over well. The country was swept up in wartime patriotism, and Lincoln's critics labeled him, quote, Spotify Lincoln, as his preferred music streaming platform was Spotify. Oop, I think I read that wrong. Critics labeled him Spotting Lincoln, calling him a traitor. Realizing he had zero chance of getting reelected, he didn't even bother running for reelection in 1848. He went back home to Springfield with his political career seemingly dead in the water. For the next 5 years, Lincoln focused on his law practice. He became one of the most successful lawyers in Illinois, representing everyone from poor farmers to massive railroad corporations. He rode the, quote, judicial circuit, traveling from county seat to county seat on horseback. February 1st, 1850 was the date of another tragedy. That's the day the Lincolns lost Eddie. He likely died from tuberculosis. He was just 3 years old. Lincoln probably would have stayed a wealthy corporate lawyer forever if it weren't for one man, Stephen Douglas. Yeah, there he is. That's what he looks like. Hello, Stephen. Douglas was a powerful Democratic U.S. Senator from Illinois, and in 1854, he pushed through the Kansas-Nebraska Act, a horrible law that I have talked about in many of my videos, but for some strange reason, you don't know what it is, maybe because you don't watch all of my videos. Shame on you if you haven't. The Kansas-Nebraska Act created the territories of Kansas and Nebraska, opened them for settlement, and allowed the new settlers to determine whether they would be admitted to the Union as a free state or slave state. 3, 2, 1.
Popular sovereignty.
What? Yeah, this predictably caused a mad rush of both pro-slavery and anti-slavery advocates to Kansas. And Lincoln hated this law. He believed slavery was a moral wrong that was fundamentally at odds with the Declaration of Independence. While he still didn't believe the Constitution allowed the federal government to abolish slavery where it already existed, he felt it absolutely had to be contained so it would eventually die out.
Yeah, actually, it's because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act that Lincoln decides to get back into politics again. He was so upset.
Well, the Kansas-Nebraska Act destroyed the Whig Party, and out of its ashes rose a brand new, purely northern political group, the Republican Party. Lincoln joined up and quickly became its star in Illinois. And in 1858, Lincoln challenged Stephen A. Douglas for his U.S. Senate seat.
Why do we always say Stephen A. Douglas? Why don't we just say Stephen Douglas?
They engaged in a series of 7 legendary outdoor debates across Illinois. Massive crowds turned out to watch these two political titans go at it for hours. Douglas painted Lincoln as a radical, quote, black Republican who wanted full racial equality, which was a massive political liability back then. And Lincoln, trying to appeal to a racist electorate while maintaining his moral ground, gave his famous House Divided speech, arguing, quote, a house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure. Permanently half slave and half free. I mean, Lincoln also was probably racist himself, I'd argue. Here's another quote by Lincoln at one of those debates. Quote, I am not, nor ever have been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. Oof, just oofness, Abraham. Whether he actually meant those words or not, his racist appeals wouldn't be enough. While Lincoln actually won the popular vote in Illinois, due to gerrymandered legislative districts at the time, the state legislature chose Douglas for the Senate. Lincoln lost. But here's a plot twist. By going toe-to-toe with the famous Stephen Douglas, Lincoln became a national celebrity. His debates were printed in newspapers all over the country. Just as the country was marching towards civil war, more and more Americans wanted this Lincoln fellow to run for president. I can't wait to see your reaction.
Are you wanting me to march too, or what?
No. In February 1860, a famous abolitionist named Henry Ward Beecher invited Lincoln to give a speech to his congregation in Brooklyn, New York. Well, so many people wanted to go that they had to change the location to a much bigger venue. Uh-oh, looks like we got a rock star on our hands. Despite his popularity, Lincoln wasn't the front runner when the Republican Party met up at its national convention in May of that year. That would be William Seward, the U.S. Senator from New York. But Seward had too much political baggage. Lincoln was viewed as a moderate, a family man from the West, and an outsider who could win crucial swing states. Oh, he locked down the nomination all right. The Republicans chose Hannibal Hamlin, a senator from Maine, as his running mate. The presidential election of 1860 was the most chaotic in American history. It's the only presidential election to be a big cause and directly lead to the American Civil War, for crying out loud. In the months leading up to the election, most Southerners seemed to be terrified by the idea that Lincoln, if elected, would get rid of slavery. While Lincoln and the Republicans promised they did not want to ban slavery completely, many Southerners weren't convinced and swore if Lincoln won, then they were gone, as in secession. What is this?
This is a campaign wagon from his 1860 campaign.
So these wagons would come around in the neighborhood to basically raise awareness about his campaign. The Democratic Party, meanwhile, had completely fractured into northern and southern factions, while a fourth party, the Constitutional Union Party, also jumped into the race with the primary goal of keeping the country together. Now, I have a video about this presidential election, as I do every single presidential election in American history. But long story short, Lincoln won the presidency despite winning only 39.8% of the popular vote. He didn't win a single southern state. In fact, 10 southern states didn't even put his name on the ballot.
Lincoln does not win the 1860 presidential election without a four-way split.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. His home county in 2 elections both go for his opponent.
In retaliation, Lincoln grew a beard. Nah, just kidding. He grew a beard because an 11-year-old told him to. Have you ever not had a beard?
No, actually, I was born with this.
Seriously, an 11-year-old named Grace Bedell wrote him, telling him he'd look better if he grew one. And when an 11-year-old tells you to do something, you do it. Right, Regan? And sure enough, before Lincoln even took the oath of office, South Carolina seceded from the Union. On December 18, 1860, a U.S. Senator from Kentucky named John Crittenden desperately tried to keep the country together with a proposal to make it unconstitutional for future Congresses to end slavery. Known as the Crittenden Compromise, to Lincoln and his fellow Republicans, this wasn't a compromise at all. They rejected the proposal. By February 1861, 6 more states followed, forming an entirely new country called the Confederate States of America. When Lincoln arrived in Washington, D.C. for his inauguration, he had to sneak into the city at night in disguise because of assassination plots against him. In his first inaugural speech, Lincoln referred to what he had said before, quote, "I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. I believe I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so." But it was too late. The nation was already breaking apart before he even set foot in the Oval Office.
On Lincoln's first day, he had to walk into the White House, and on his desk is the thing saying, "States are leaving the Union. What are you going to do about it?"
Yeah.
No other president has ever had to deal with that. Like, states literally leaving the Union, and now it's like up to the president to basically figure it out. Like, what are you going to do?
Lincoln's cabinet was kind of awesome.
But they didn't really like him.
Lincoln chose his advisors carefully. He wanted the most competent people. He didn't care if they had once been his political opponents. He didn't care if they didn't like each other. The historian Doris Kearns Goodwin famously described his cabinet as a team of rivals. The aforementioned William Seward, who, remember, ran against Lincoln for president, became his Secretary of State. The Ohio governor and U.S. Senator Salmon Chase, who also ran against Lincoln for president, became his Secretary of the Treasury. Lincoln's Attorney General, a former congressman from Missouri named Edward Bates, who, you guessed it, also ran against Lincoln for president. Lincoln would make 5 appointments to the Supreme Court. Noah Haynes Swain, I love saying his name, Samuel Freeman Miller, David Davis, Stephen Johnson Field, who was a Democrat, mind you, and the aforementioned Salmon Chase. But Lincoln didn't have much time to focus on his team because on April 12, 1861, just 39 days after Lincoln had become president, Confederate forces opened fire on Fort Sumter, a federal outpost in South Carolina. The American Civil War had officially begun. Lincoln immediately called for 75,000 volunteer troops to put down the rebellion. In response, 4 more Upper South states, including freaking Virginia, seceded and joined the Confederacy. Lincoln faced the biggest crisis any president has ever faced. 11 states left the Union, and he had to prevent 4 more slave states, known as the border states, also from seceding. He had to build up an army from scratch, and he had to deal with the fact that many in the North weren't even sure they wanted to fight to end slavery. If they did want to fight, they mostly just wanted to preserve the Union. Now, this is where we have to start talking about what's arguably the most controversial aspect of Lincoln's presidency: his massive, unprecedented expansion of executive power. Because Congress was out of session during the opening months of the war, Lincoln basically ran the country via executive orders. Let's break down what he did, okay? First of all, he suspended habeas corpus. But let's quickly review what habeas corpus is, since
well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country.
She was in the federal government. Habeas corpus means you can't just throw someone in jail and forget about them. A person detained by the authorities has the right to appear before a judge to know why they are being locked up and be able to challenge their detention. Well, Lincoln suspended this right, initially along the military line between Philadelphia and Washington, to keep Maryland from seceding. If Maryland seceded, Washington, D.C. would be completely surrounded by enemy territory.
What is Lincoln going to do? It's right at his doorstep where these things are beginning to happen.
Over the course of the war, over 14,000 citizens were arrested and jailed without a trial. And then, after Supreme Court Chief Justice Roger Taney ruled in a case called Ex parte Merriman that only Congress could suspend habeas corpus, Lincoln literally ignored the order. Not only that, Lincoln's administration shut down or seized over 300 newspapers that published either pro-Confederate or anti-war sentiment. And finally, Lincoln straight up spent money without congressional approval. He ordered the Treasury to advance millions of dollars to private citizens to buy war supplies, which, explicitly went against Article 1 of the Constitution. Was he a tyrant? Well, Lincoln argued that these temporary emergency measures were meant to preserve the government. He believed if the Union died, the Constitution died with it. It was a classic ends justify the means argument, but it set a massive permanent precedent for future presidents to maximize executive power during a national crisis. The first 2 years of the war were an absolute nightmare for Lincoln. The Union Army of the Potomac suffered defeat after defeat under overly cautious generals like George McClellan. Lincoln was plagued by insomnia, severe depression, and immense grief after his beloved 11-year-old son, Willie, died of typhoid fever in the White House on February 20th, 1862. 11 years old. Not funny. 11 years old. Meanwhile, more reform-minded folks in his own party, known as radical Republicans, were screaming at him to abolish slavery immediately. On the other side, Northern Democrats were screaming at him that this war was not worth it. Lincoln's own views seemed a bit more complex.
We think about him as the Great Emancipator. You got to think about he still had some racist ideology.
In an 1862 open letter to journalist Horace Greeley, he wrote, quote, "If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps to save the Union." Lincoln spent much of the first 2 years of the war actually promoting the Back to Africa movement, a call for the descendants of African American enslaved people to be helped moving back to colonies in Africa if they so wished. He genuinely doubted that black and white Americans could live together peacefully after centuries of brutal enslavement. Many folks forget that Lincoln signed some important laws that would have much impact long after the war would end. Lincoln signed laws like the Pacific Railway Act, which led to the completion of the country's first transcontinental railroad, the Morrill Land Grant College Act, which gave federal-controlled public lands to states to sell, and in return, states could establish colleges, and most famously, the Homestead Act, which accelerated Western expansion by letting any adult citizen, including freed slaves and women, claim 160 acres of free land as long as they lived on the land for 5 years to improve it. Very nice. Very cool. But back to the war. On September 17th, 1862, the bloodiest day in American history. Both Confederate and Union troops took heavy casualties at the Battle of Antietam near Sharpsburg, Maryland. 22,726 soldiers on both sides either died, got wounded, or went missing that day in the battle. 22,726 people in one day. How many people live in your hometown?
My hometown's about 33,000.
33,000, so that's not that much more.
Well, I mean, to put it in perspective, at the cornfield at Antietam, more Americans are going to fall in about a 6-acre area than will fall at D-Day in World War II. It is just an absolutely unbelievable battle.
It was the first major campaign by Confederate troops into Union territory. While commanding general of the United States Army, George McClellan, was able to push the Confederates out, the Union suffered heavier casualties in the battle. Plus, similar to previous battles, McClellan was overcautious and didn't pursue Confederate General Robert E. Lee's forces after they began to retreat. Lincoln and McClellan never had fully trusted each other, and McClellan would often talk trash about Lincoln behind his back. After the Republican Party suffered big losses in the 1862 midterm elections, Lincoln fired McClellan. On January 1st, 1863, Lincoln's most famous executive order went into effect. The Emancipation Proclamation, which declared that all slaves in areas still in rebellion against the United States were free. Now, it didn't immediately free all slaves, but it did officially change the war from just being about preserving the Union to now being about ending slavery. The proclamation also prevented European powers like Britain and France from recognizing the Confederacy because they couldn't politically justify intervening on the side of slavery. Boom! Snappity snap! Oh, and the proclamation also allowed African Americans to join the Union Army, and nearly 200,000 did, and they fought bravely.
At the count of 10, tall people in the back, less tall people in the front. 10, 9, 8, 7,
6, 5,
Stop. Bobby, that's you. 6, 5,
4.
Lincoln even credited a lot of those black soldiers with turning the tide of the war.
They were quite motivated, you could say, to win this war.
Many of the Union commanders said they made better soldiers than the white soldiers who joined.
And they really needed those soldiers. Hardly any white Americans were willing to fight at this point. In fact, Congress passed the Enrollment Act, the first widespread conscription law in American history, aka the draft. Many Americans resisted the draft. Those who could afford to buy substitutes did so. And so, like most wars in modern history, this war was mostly fought by poor people. In July 1863, the tide finally turned. The Union won 2 massive, decisive victories at around the exact same time. The Battle of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania and the capture of Vicksburg, Mississippi, which split the Confederacy in half. The Battle of Gettysburg is probably the most famous battle in American history, and for good reason. It marked the turning point of the American Civil War. After it, the Union had win after win after win after win. Still, the 3-day battle was the bloodiest in American history up to that point. More than 50,000 casualties on both sides. Due to these heavy losses, Lincoln decided to travel to the battle site in November to dedicate a new national cemetery. No one there knew it at the time, but this is where Lincoln would give his most famous speech, and arguably the most famous speech in American history. His dedication speech was just 271 words long, lasting barely over 2 minutes, but boy, did it have an impact. Quote, 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, he began. Lincoln praised the soldiers, arguing that their sacrifice should elevate the country's commitment to ensuring the Union win, famously saying that the soldiers ought not to die in vain, ending his speech saying, quote, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Newspapers far and wide printed what became known as the Gettysburg Address.
Lincoln gives this speech that really encapsulates what the entire Civil War was about, but even more than that, you can argue encapsulates what America is all about. You have the government of the people, by the people, for the people.
Indeed, it completely redefined the meaning of the war. Still, the war dragged on. By 1864, the war had dragged on for 3 brutal years. By that time, Lincoln had finally found his general in Ulysses S. Grant, a dude willing to fight a brutal, aggressive war of attrition in order to crush the rebellion. However, Grant's campaigns in Virginia were resulting in staggering casualties, and the Northern public was growing deeply exhausted. And hey, it was a presidential election year. Lincoln decided to run for re-election, even though he had big doubts he could actually win. To the surprise of many, Lincoln chose Andrew Johnson as his running mate, a Democrat, in order to have broader appeal and promote national unity.
The 1864 presidential election was the only one in American history to feature a Republican and Democrat running together on the same ticket. That video has half the views of my 1860 election video, so I know that many of you didn't watch it. Shame on you. Oh, and guess who Lincoln's main opponent was? Go on, guess. Fred Armisen? No, that's wrong.
His main opponent was his former top general, George McClellan, who ran as a peace candidate wanting to negotiate an end to the war with the Confederacy. At first, it did indeed seem like McClellan had the advantage in the election. But then, in September 1864, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman captured Atlanta, Georgia, and began his famous, devastating March to the Sea. This massive military breakthrough proved to Northern voters that the war was almost won. Lincoln actually ended up cruising to what some say was a landslide re-election victory, winning 55% of the popular vote and securing the support of Union soldiers who voted overwhelmingly for their commander-in-chief.
I didn't lose. I merely failed to win.
By the end of the year, Union forces were closing in on the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia.
Lincoln's back on top, baby. He easily wins re-election. He's about to win the war. What could go wrong?
John Wilkes Booth.
On March 4th, 1865, Lincoln delivered his second inaugural address. Instead of celebrating his victory or demonizing the South, his speech was incredibly somber and forgiving. He noted that both sides, quote, read the same Bible and prayed to the same God, and urged the nation to move forward. Quote, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds. Lincoln was already looking toward Reconstruction, or basically looking at how to rebuild the country without destroying the South's economy completely, while ensuring freedom for the formerly enslaved population. Hey, speaking of the enslaved population, Lincoln tirelessly worked behind the scenes, convincing members of Congress to support the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which would make slavery illegal.
Except as a punishment to a crime. Except as a punishment to a crime.
By the end of the year, the 13th Amendment became part of the Constitution. It was the first amendment to the Constitution in 61 years. On April 9th, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The war was effectively over. 2 days later, Lincoln gave a speech from the White House balcony regarding his Reconstruction plans, during which he publicly advocated for giving voting rights to literate black men and those who had served in the military.
Dang, Lincoln! Changing your mind like that.
In the crowd that night was John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor and fanatical Confederate sympathizer. Hearing Lincoln support black suffrage, Booth furiously muttered, quote, that is the last speech he will ever make. On April 14th, 1865, just 5 days after Appomattox and also Good Friday, mind you, Lincoln and Mary went to see a comedy play called Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. During the third act, Booth slipped into the presidential box completely undetected and shot Lincoln in the back of the head. Lincoln was carried across the street to a boarding house where he remained unconscious through the night. He passed away at 7:22 a.m. the following morning, April 15, 1865. He was 56 years old. Upon his death, his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, famously remarked, quote, "Now he belongs to the ages." It was the first time a president had been assassinated in American history. Lincoln was the first of 4 presidents assassinated.
It's actually one of the wildest stories ever told, and it's all true. I made a whole video about it. I kind of recommend. 6 out of 10.
The country was devastated. A controversial president when he was alive, his death turned him into a martyr.
But I think that's because we humans tend to not appreciate how great someone is until they're gone.
Yeah, and Lincoln is a prime example of that. I mean, he dies at the peak of his success, and we basically make this hero out of him, and it kind of gives us a skewed view of who he actually was.
Behind us is, you were just telling me, the tallest presidential tomb in the country?
I can't say that officially.
Okay.
But when they get this completed in 1874, it's shorter. And then they add 5 more feet to it. And so at that point, it becomes 117 feet. And after Garfield, McKinley, all of those subsequent presidents afterwards, they want that to be a little bit shorter than what they've got up here. Basically, this is the premier presidential burial site from the very beginning.
Obviously, you want who many considered to be the greatest president to have the biggest tomb.
Yeah.
What's a common theme you notice when visitors come here to see this? What's a common thing you hear from them?
I would say number one, mostly kind of awe. They think this is a fitting tribute to, what Abraham Lincoln was. I've heard people say this isn't enough. This is probably one of the strangest presidential burial sites that you'll go to. People came down, criminals, counterfeiters in 1876 come down from Chicago. They tried to steal Abraham Lincoln's body. He's the only chief executive that has ever tried to actually be stolen out of his tomb. That's just one of the things that has happened up on this hillside at Abraham Lincoln's tomb, and that's by far, I'll put that in the top 2 strangest things that's happened up here.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Most presidential historians say that Abraham Lincoln is the greatest president in American history. Why do you think most historians consider him the greatest president?
Well, because he did something that was, I'm not gonna say it was unpopular, because abolition was becoming more and more popular, but he did it, right?
Yeah.
And he didn't have to. He could have kept kicking the can down the road like so many other presidents had done. He actually was like, okay, it's gonna end right here, right now, and that's it.
From my expertise and what I know about other presidents, he was an extraordinary man for an extraordinary time. I think he was put in that position for a reason, and he was in one of the most tumultuous times in American history.
And sure, I've had my criticisms of the guy, and he may not be my favorite president, but you'd be foolish to deny his greatness as a leader.
He was able to do everything that you want a great leader to be able to do.
He would have been a strong leader even during stable times, but he was a strong leader during the country's most chaotic time. He knew when to take a stand. He knew when to compromise and form coalitions. He knew when to change his mind, and he did all of those things.
Like, a lot. Lincoln was everything you could have wanted out of a president. Tall, dark, handsome, and other things.
In my video about what makes a good president, I argue there are 10 things that make a person a good president.
Jared, in my opinion, a good president is honest, willing to listen, open to change, disciplined, decisive, pragmatic, empathetic, courageous, and really good at communicating.
Yes, you used the adjective I was looking for, decisive.
That's a big one.
That's a big one. But yes, everything you listed there, I completely agree with. They need to be willing to change, to listen to others. But yes, they got to be decisive. They're a leader, so they got to be decisive. And Lincoln was decisive.
You had 2 presidents before him who were the opposite of that.
Lincoln was all 10 of those things. Honest? Well, his freaking nickname was Honest Abe.
Do you know where that nickname Honest Abe comes from?
I honestly don't know. Well,
I never found
sorry,
that out.
I didn't mean the pun. Honestly, I don't know.
He listened to his advisors. He listened to his wife. Again, he changed his mind. Despite going through tremendous hardship both in his personal life and with the country as a whole during his presidency, Lincoln showed remarkable discipline. Unlike his predecessors, Lincoln was decidedly decisive.
Oh, he made decisions all right. Big ones.
Lincoln was undoubtedly pragmatic, especially with his work. And if it wasn't obvious enough by this point in the video, Lincoln had empathy and courage. And heck yeah, he could talk. One of the best speakers in American history. As it turns out, I did find Abraham Lincoln. Actually, I found a lot of them. But I had to go back to Kansas to find them. And those Abraham Lincolns, they can sing, man. Anyway, I guess Lincoln is everywhere, is what I'm trying to say.
He's a myth, a legend, the man, myth, the legend. And we would probably be two different countries if it wasn't for him. So,
would you say he's based? So, your students, what do they think about this Abraham Lincoln guy?
You know, I think sometimes students don't necessarily appreciate him as much as they should.
Right?
He's basically this mythical, historic figure that we've created such huge legendary mythology around that they don't appreciate the man that he actually was. The more I've learned about history, the more, especially studying the Civil War, you just begin to appreciate more and more of the things that he did and the mistakes that he made. I mean, yes, he was not perfect, as none of us are, but you know, I think he was trying his best in the time that he lived in.
Did he have aura?
Yeah, Abraham Lincoln had a lot of aura.
And he had lots of riz. I'm telling you, like, he would just walk in a room and everyone would be like, oh.
Historians tend to rank Lincoln as the greatest American president, not because he was flawless, but because when history handed him an impossible situation, he figured it out. He didn't just save the United States. He kinda rebooted it. He took a country that was living a lie, claiming all men are created equal while holding millions in chains, and forced it to begin the long, painful process of actually living up to its own ideals. It's in our darkest moments that true leaders emerge, and Lincoln was the absolute right person at the absolute right time. We will almost certainly remember him in 1,000 years. It certainly helps that his face is carved into a mountain and that his memorial is the most epic memorial for an American ever.
What so many people lose sight of is that, you know, the United States, we were only 87 years old at that time, 7 years ago. A lot of Europe looked at us and said, that country's a joke. They're trying democracy, that's gonna fail. And they were like, the Civil War is proof that democracies don't work. And I think Lincoln had the foresight to realize if I allow this union to be dissolved, it's going to prove that democracy doesn't work. And who knows if we would have democracies today in the world. I mean, I think, you know, if Lincoln had not stuck to his guns and said, hey, I'm gonna see this thing through, we may not have the democracies we have today. We definitely would not have the democracy we have today here in the United States if it was not for Lincoln.
Yeah, wow. That's really deep. That's a good place to end it. Okay. All right. Yeah. But it's not enough to remember him. We need to remember why he was so great, which is why I recommend watching this video. Oh, you already did? Well, thank you, buddy. That's really cool of you. Thanks to Jared from the Daily Bell Ringer for collaborating with me for this video. Everyone subscribe and like every single one of his videos or you will face punishment, quite frankly.
You can search up the Daily Bell Ringer on there, or you can check me out at www.dailybellringer.com. I have a lot of resources there for teachers.
We actually have our own website for our podcast. It's called the Civil Weird Podcast.
Check out Civil Weird Podcast. I'm gonna check it out.
Thanks, man.
And here are 3 books that I used for researching for this video. First of all, Team of Rivals, of course, by Doris, Kearns, Goodwin. Then we got another classic, A. Lincoln by Ronald C. White Jr. And then one of the greatest storytellers alive right now, John Meacham's, And There Was Light. As always, a full list of all sources are listed in the description of this video. So tell me, Sabrina Carpenter, was Lincoln our greatest president? Could anyone else hold the country together in such a moment of crisis? I mean, could even your grandmother do that? Could your grandma do that?
Probably not, no.
Yeah, I mean, you know, no disrespect to grandmas out there. Let me know by sending me a letter. I'm not joking. My address is P.O. Box 1982, Lawrence, Kansas 66044.
All right.
That's right, yeah. If you liked this deeper look at Lincoln's presidency and life, please consider liking this video and checking out my other presidential biography videos. For real.